Hello, in this video, I'm going to show you how to make spicy ketchup, either from a bottled ketchup or from scratch with canned or fresh tomatoes. I will provide a recipe that's basic that you can use with any of those options, and then I will also make some suggestions for other variations, and I'll make a few recommendations as well about how to enhance the flavor of your ketchup. So if you're going to make some spicy ketchup using this video, these are the things you're going to need: either plain bottled ketchup or tomatoes, canned or fresh. You'll need some kind of spice to add to your ketchup. I recommend onion and garlic, especially fresh, and some salt and pepper, some cooking oil to saute everything, because that will help to enhance the flavor. If you're not using bottled ketchup, you're also going to want some vinegar and some kind of sweetener like maple syrup. You may want a little tomato paste if you're using canned tomatoes to help thicken it. And then if you're not using bottled ketchup, you'll definitely want a blender or a food processor. But even if you are, if you're using whole ingredients like onion and garlic, which I do recommend, you're going to want a blender or a food processor to puree, but it's not absolutely essential. You could have a somewhat chunky ketchup if you don't mind that. And then you'll also need to cook these spices if you want the best flavor, though that's not absolutely necessary, and I'll make some suggestions about what to do if you aren't going to cook your ketchup. So I will start with the recipe using bottled ketchup. For those of you who want to do just a very quick ketchup, you can do it this way, and I'll make some suggestions about other variations and what to do to enhance the flavor. And then you can be done with the video if you want. For those of you who want to make it from scratch, you could skip ahead a little bit and just get to the part where I talk about how to do canned and fresh tomato ketchup. So if you're just doing bottled ketchup, what I recommend, because cooking spices helps to enhance their flavor, is that you do get a little bit of oil and saute some onion and garlic, and then add some chili or chili pepper flakes if you're going to do something like that. And then you'll want to add the ketchup and just any other spices you're using. I have some recommendations here. You can use all of these, only some of them, or some combination to make a basic spicy ketchup recipe. And just cook everything then, and the ketchup will cook for about 5 minutes. That will help to bring out the flavor of the spices. Once you're done with that, if you want it to be a smooth ketchup, you will want to process, because the onion and the garlic are going to give it some chunks, and potentially the red pepper flakes too, if you use those, or a chopped chili pepper. And then just, if you're using bottled ketchup, let it stand in the fridge for a couple of hours. That will give the flavor a chance to come through a bit. You can serve it right away if you need to, but it's better if you can put it aside for a little bit and let the flavors come through. Other things you can do, if you really want something quick, then I recommend using a sauce like hot sauce rather than dry spices. Just mix a tablespoon or two of like a hot sauce, depending on your preferences. Put in a little bit, taste it, see if that's enough, add a little more to get it to the heat level that you want. And then just let that stand. If you can put it aside and refrigerate it for a while too, or you can serve it right away. That's the quickest thing you can possibly do. If you are going to use any kind of dry spices like curry powder or chili powder or anything that I recommend in the original recipe, then I do think you should at least saute those spices by themselves in a little bit of oil to start, and then add the ketchup and cook everything together for about 5 minutes, because those dry spices, their flavors are released when they are cooked with heat. You can even dry cook them in a pan if you're really trying to avoid adding any extra oil and you don't want to cook onion and garlic. Put them in a pan on medium heat for maybe 2 minutes or so, and move the pan, shake it around a bit. Once you start to smell the aroma of the spices, then you'll know that the flavors are being released, and you can remove the pan from the stove and you can mix it in with your ketchup. And then I do recommend that you let that stand. Another option is you could mix that ketchup in and let it cook for a few minutes in the pan along with the spices. Either one of those will be better than just adding some dry curry powder or chili powder to some ketchup and mixing it cold and serving it up. Tomatoes are a great flavor enhancer, but to maximize that flavor with these spices, as I've said, you do want to cook things for a bit. And the ketchup itself has already been cooked. Likewise, canned tomatoes have already been cooked, but we're still going to cook with canned tomatoes and spices for a while on the stovetop, because cooking everything together with heat brings out those flavors much better. So if you want to make the recipe from canned tomatoes, you can also do this with fresh tomatoes, and you can skip ahead and I will give you that recipe as well. There's really only a couple of extra steps, which involve washing and stemming about a pound of tomatoes, and then pureeing the tomato without the stems, and then pressing them through a sieve to get rid of any unprocessed seeds and skin. And then basically you follow this recipe, but you don't need to necessarily use any tomato paste unless it just won't thicken for you, but it thickens for me just fine. But if you're using canned tomatoes, you can puree the entire can of tomatoes. You don't need to worry about processing them. The skins have already been removed, unless you really are trying to get rid of the seeds. But you don't really need to do that with the canned tomatoes because the seeds have softened as well once they've been canned. So they're going to puree much easier than a fresh tomato will. So you just go ahead and, as you would with a bottled ketchup, you saute the onion and the garlic and maybe a fresh chili if you're using that, or you can add some chili pepper flakes and then mix in the tomatoes that have been pureed and just let everything cook, along with possibly some tomato paste. And I recommend starting with a half a tablespoon, add more later after about 45 minutes if it's not thick enough, and cook a little longer. But a half a tablespoon is enough for me with a single 14-ounce can of tomatoes. But 45 to 50 minutes will allow the tomatoes to thicken to the consistency of ketchup. And then if you allow those spices to cook with the tomatoes during that time, you're going to have a really nice flavorful ketchup. I recommend at about 30 minutes tasting it and seeing if it's got the right amount of spice and the right amount of sweetness. Start with probably a tablespoon of your sweetener, because you can always add more, but you can't take it out if it's too sweet. A tablespoon is all I need, but I don't like my foods to be super sweet when they're a savory kind of food, but you could add more if you want. But start with a tablespoon and then add more if you need it, more sweetener, more spices, whatever you like. You could even do a hot sauce if you'd prefer instead of chilies, and taste it and see if you need more. Or if the chilies aren't hot enough and you don't want to chop up more chilies, you could add a little hot sauce or some chili pepper flakes at that point. And then once everything's cooled, puree it so that it's nice and smooth, and it'll look like ketchup and it'll be ready to eat. If you let it stand for a couple of hours, chill it in the fridge, it'll get some nice flavor and it'll be ready to go. And this will keep for a while in the fridge, but you could also freeze it if you wanted to, or you could can it if you wanted. This is the kind of thing that I do quickly, though, once in a while, as a special treat, not something that I necessarily keep in my pantry all the time. So as I said, if you're doing this with fresh tomatoes, everything is the same, except you're going to need to wash and stem those tomatoes. You'll want about a pound. A pound is going to do about as much as a 14-ounce can of tomatoes. And both are going to end up getting you about a half a cup or so of ketchup, which is the same as the half cup bottled ketchup recipe, give or take, depending on how much tomato you actually weigh out, how much gets pressed through the sieve, and how much remains. But otherwise, this recipe is the same. And you can do the other variations if you want to as well. Like I said, you could do hot sauce instead of chili peppers or chili pepper flakes. You can add some kind of curry powder instead of the other dry spices that I recommend, or you can add some other spice blend. Since all of these make about a half a cup of ketchup, the 2 teaspoons of spice blend is a good starting point as well if you're doing canned or fresh tomatoes to make your own ketchup. You would just add them and let them cook for a longer period of time for that 45 minutes or so in order to bring out the flavors well. That's going to really be the best tasting ketchup if you have the time and want to make the effort. But even just a quick ketchup is definitely worth trying for something different once in a while. So this is what the tomatoes look like when they're pureed, and I will show you as well what the ketchup looks like when it's finished. So this is the ketchup that is made with canned tomatoes, and this is the one made with fresh tomatoes. I don't know if this camera can capture the difference, but the fresh ripe tomatoes were a bit more red. Now it could have been the variety of tomatoes that I used. I used local heirloom tomatoes that were really ripe, so they produced a very dark red ketchup. The canned tomatoes were just a little bit duller in color, but still a nice ketchup, and both are really flavorful. Another thing that you can do is if you make this basic ketchup recipe from the canned tomatoes or from scratch, you can always make more as well if you really want to have a lot of ketchup on hand. Or if you're not using a whole lot of it at a time, because it takes a little bit of time to go through ketchup unless you're feeding a lot of people. You can even take this as a base recipe and then add other things to it. I might use, since I have a little bit of both, I might use some hot sauce with it, or I might go ahead and cook it again for about 5 minutes with some curry powder spices or some chili powder, just to give some different things a try. Or maybe since it's fresh local pepper season, I'll go ahead and roast a pepper and mix that in and puree it. All of these things are good for enhancing the flavor of plain ketchup, or even just a very mildly spicy ketchup. This recipe, the basic recipe, isn't super spicy. I mean, it can be pretty hot if you use very hot chilies, but the basic recipe is just a nice balance of sweet and tart and spicy. And then it can serve as a basis for you to add other things, either while you're cooking it, or if you just take a little bit of it at a time from serving to serving and mix a little bit of hot sauce or something in with it to give different things a try. So these are some basic suggestions and recipes you can try, but you can get creative and find other recipes. There are plenty of others that you can find on the internet, and possibly in other cookbooks that you can get from the library. You can also just go rooting through your pantry if you like getting creative, and find things in your pantry and your fridge like garlic chili oil, those fresh peppers that are around now, different kinds of fresh herbs can be nice to add as well. And if you don't want your ketchup to be totally smooth, you can just go ahead and chop up your fresh cilantro or parsley and add it to a serving or two of ketchup, and enjoy it fresh as a kind of garnish. But go ahead and try a lot of different things, and I hope that you enjoy your spicy ketchup with things like fries and roasted vegetables, burgers, and all of those things that we like ketchup with.